1. To preface, I go to Catholic school, so my parents have to pay tuition for me to go to school there, and we're not rich by any means. Working class, and so I am on a lot of financial aid, about half of my tuition cost. And because my financial aid was, or rather still is, as I'm only a junior, so much, after school ended, all of us on a lot of financial aid would be assigned a room, and mine was up on the 3rd floor, the science floor now, that used to house nuns who lived at the school, but that's irrelevant to this. And I would clean the room, just spray the desks down with the cleaner, straighten them, sweep, clean the whiteboards, do whatever. And the teacher whose room it was would sometimes ask me to do a few extra things here and there because she was a physics teacher in her 2nd year of teaching at my school, so there would be some toys and such laying around the room that her students would forget to put away themselves. It really only took me maybe 10 minutes extra at the most, and my carpool just waited for me to be done, and by that time, the bulk of the traffic had calmed down, so the streets were a lot freer, and it was a quicker drive. The year passes by, without anything unusual happening in regards to this, and towards the end of the year the teacher started talking about moving, and I asked where she was moving to, and she responded with a Central American country, Panama, I believe, which surprised me as I live in the Midwest of America, so that would be a long ways away. From our idle chat, either she or her husband had found a really nice job there, and so they were moving there for a few years, and she wouldn't be teaching at my school anymore. For which I was kind of glad, because even though I liked her, I wanted to take physics my senior year, and I was worried at that point that I would inevitably start failing her class, as then I hadn't been diagnosed, let alone treated, for ADHD and depression. And those things really did start affecting my grades as I got older. So I wouldn't have to worry about having her and disappointing her with my grades then. But I really did like her, and I thought she was a nice person, and I was sad to see her leave. Doing that in and of itself wasn't anything weird. It was just normal for me after a while, a part of a routine. Spray and straighten the desks, sweep, put the books away, make small talk with her if she was in the room, she usually was, and leave and check off on the list that I cleaned her room. They didn't make me do it after that year, so I could just go straight away after school. They got a new physics teacher, a guy this time, and he was in a different room than hers because of some of the teachers switching classrooms, for one reason or another. And that didn't strike me as abnormal. Just whatever. And, well, sophomore year was normal. I'm a junior now. We're about 2 weeks from the end of the 1st quarter, and we're doing ACT practice in the new physics teacher's room. It wasn't the first time we had done this. A certain group of juniors would go up to his room that was based on our homerooms, and take parts of the practice test and such, and he knew my name already when he called out attendance for the test, but I never thought much of it. He knew plenty of other students who had never had him before. But the freaky part is, this comment he made to me, he referenced me cleaning his room 2 years ago, about how sometimes he would have things up on the whiteboard and ask me to leave them there or to just clean it all, or not even bother. I did those things, but with him? I never cleaned his room, ever. I only ever cleaned the old teacher's room. I gave him a confused look, and told him I never cleaned his room. I cleaned the old teacher's room, the one that was here before she left. He told me that he's been there for years, that this is his 4th year at my school. I just brushed it off, and left the room to go to my next class, figuring that maybe he was confusing me with someone else or something. I very much remember that I cleaned her room. I remember her talking about her son, and I remember her voice. I remember talking about how we were both vegetarians. I remember her. When I went home, I looked into my freshman yearbook to look for her, just to see that he wasn't in there. But he was. I flipped through every single page, and I couldn't find a picture of her. No other staff members remember her. 2. This takes place around 6 years ago at a community college in California. Like most community colleges, there are all kinds of people. The ones I'm going to tell you about are myself, Ed, and probably one of the weirdest and dysfunctional, I thought, people at this JC. I'm 23 years old at the time. Mega hippie, vegetarian, yoga, pot smoking, workout freak. Post-army rebellious stage. I've seen and heard a lot of shit in my day, but this was utterly trippy. Ed is 42 at the time. He was the son of a boxing gym owner, former rapper, convict, and now has a double PhD. Ed is one of the most innately intelligent people I have ever met. He's usually manic as fuck, rambling and talking but dropping gems. He picked up chess in jail at 20 years old, and 3 years later he was winning major tournaments. He's a mentor and an amazing person. Oh, and he can knock you the hell out too. He grew up in Oakland. Him and I have gotten into a lot of crazy shit before he and I quit drinking, and he never seemed shaken. As a matter of fact, this story is probably the only time I ever saw a crack in his armor. Ed has 5 kids by 4 different women, and 2 years ago, during the time of this story, discovered he had a 5-year-old, making him his youngest. Okay, sorry, but I like introducing people, so you know we're not some ignorant hicks or idiots. Now the story. At the JC, there was this middle-aged Korean lady. She is always with a handler, or waiting for her in the courtyard. When her handler is not there, she can sometimes get into trouble because she either had a form of Tourette syndrome or schizophrenia. She didn't have Down syndrome. To be honest, I don't know why she was always there, but that's neither here nor there. Plenty of programs for the disabled were at our school. So, sometimes, she'd come up to people and want to socialize, but she really could not. Like, at all. It kinda hurt watching her try and fail and be frustrated. All her sentences were totally incoherent, with random words and thoughts. She absolutely never made sense. One week, Ed and I met up at our usual spot and walked past her, and she was trying to talk to Ed and, like always, made no sense, so we both kinda smiled and made agreeing statements and walked to our class while she remained waiting for her handler. The next day she tried talking to Ed again, but this time was more insistent, more desperate in her tone and body language. And when we tried the same tactic, she started to kind of walk with us until her handler finally came and escorted her off. Now, this is a MWF class. I see Ed 5 days a week. So, Thursday I see him and he seems off. I know him and kind of probe a bit, and he gives me nothing. Unlike him, I know something is bothering him. Friday I see Ed, he's even more in his head today. We say nothing, and sure enough our luck is that we run into this old Korean lady. This time she sees Ed and freaking walks over and is grabbing him, trying to tell him something. She's being loud and not making any fucking sense like always. So Ed has had it and says something like, "God damn it, you crazy bitch, stop touching me." And this lady went from non-coherent, harmless, old mentally ill Korean lady to... I don't know how to explain it. Once he said that, her demeanor and weird tics all stopped. She straightened up, looked him right in the eyes, which she never did. Yeah, maybe she was autistic now that I remember that. And said these words in a perfect sentence, and totally calm. "Don't be mad that you finally met your first child. What's done is done. Do what you can now and from here on." At this, Ed was just stone-faced as their eyes locked and said, "Let's go, bro." And she let go and we walked off. I was kinda like, man, she's weird, poor lady. Saying things to Ed like how I hope she is okay and how I wonder if that lady ever had real conversations or was always just saying random shit. And he blurts out, "Wednesday night I found out a one-night stand 23 years ago with this freaky Mormon chick resulted in my firstborn, whom I have never met. That's why I was tripping on Thursday. Sorry I didn't tell you." And I was still on the Korean lady in my head, and immediately freaked out. How the fuck? What the fuck just fucking happened? I don't know, man. We only told a few people what happened because nobody would believe us, and we didn't want anybody messing with that lady. But the last few weeks of school she was still there, still talking nonsense, still waiting on her handler. And a few times even tried talking to us again, and there was absolutely no recognition in her eyes when she saw Ed or I. We talk randomly like once a year on the phone or when big things happen in our lives. This encounter comes up every time. It still trips us out. 3. This story happened in the summer of 2002. I was 14 years old, and as it was a warm, sunny day, I took my CD Walkman, small speakers, and a pile of CDs outside to listen to and make up dance routines. Not good ones, mind you, but I had fun doing it. This was at a time when I still bought the popular single CDs from HMV. I can't believe it's been over a decade since I've been there. I put the CD, Freak Like Me by the Sugar Babes, into my Walkman, pressed play, and went to prepare myself to dance. The song started, but it wasn't the song I expected. Instead, what played was Stuck in the Middle with You, covered by Louise Redknapp. Odd, I thought. I was sure the CD I put in the player was the right one. After leaving the song to play for a minute, to make sure it was definitely not the right song, they don't sound alike, I walked over to the player, stopped it, and popped open the lid. I was right, the CD was the Sugar Babes. At that point I was confused. I owned the Louise single as well, and opened the case from a pile of CDs to check it was in there. It was. It was your average Walkman, with a laser reader. It didn't store music, so I couldn't understand what had happened. I closed the lid and pressed play again to see if it still played the wrong song. After all, it would have been annoying if my CD had been overwritten somehow. This time the Sugar Babes song started playing as normal. Now I was a little freaked out. What the hell was happening? I told my parents about it and they thought it was interesting, but it didn't bother them. They probably didn't believe me or thought I was just mistaken. I know for sure that I wasn't. Nothing like this has ever happened again. I even shared it with a few others, and they found it spooky and couldn't explain it. I had seen The Truman Show at this time, and it made me kind of paranoid, as a 14-year-old person might feel. I never associated it with The Matrix until hearing other glitch stories. I prefer the multiverse theory to explain it, but I am curious to find out if this happened to anyone else. 4. This incident happened in early November 2009 at around 5 p.m. in Harlem, New York. I relocated with my husband from the South to New York for about a year for his job, and to spend time with my family who are New York natives. I had a beautiful baby girl a month prior to this incident, and I needed to take a short trip on a train to a nearby Target to pick up some diaper rash ointment, a preventative measure, and some Welch's grape juice, which I still craved a month after her birth. The trip was going fine, and I left the store, heading home to meet my husband, who would soon be getting home from work. It was cloudy, but not very dark for the time of day, and I was approaching a rather large 4-lane street that was across from the train station. I was walking at a moderate pace but slowing down as the light changed, and cars began coming in both directions. A short distance away from the road, my foot caught on a broken piece of sidewalk that I had not noticed previously. I tripped forward into the street very quickly, with a scream, dropping my bag in the process, terrified for both myself and my daughter. Having fell flat, I immediately tried to right myself, trying to get my arms underneath me, but fumbling in my panic. I glanced to my left and saw a car's headlights approaching too fast, while my daughter's screams resounded in my ears. I shut my eyes and the sound slightly faded. I then felt a hand on my arm, and opened my eyes quickly and took stock of the situation. My daughter was quiet but was gradually starting to fuss. I was on my hands and knees, a foot away from the curb, and badly shaken up. I looked at the lady who was holding onto my arm, trying to help me up. I was still too scared to speak. I hugged her carefully when I stood, thanking her for pulling me out of the street. I then took my daughter, who was strapped to my chest in a carrier, and looked her over. After I was sure she was okay, I placed her back inside, knowing I would be taking her to the ER to be certain. I know I fell flat on my chest on her, because the wind was knocked out of me. I turned back to the woman. She was looking at me with a shocked expression, and said she was helping me stand from the sidewalk, and I didn't fall in the street. I looked to where the car was approaching and saw a car of a completely different color, parked not 3 feet from where I fell. I was crying slightly, and looking around, there was a cut on my knee, and my jeans were ripped, and the juice I was carrying was busted open on the sidewalk. I was too shaken to go up to the store to replace it, so I just picked up the diaper rash ointment, placed it in my bag, and quietly waited to cross the street once again. The woman who helped me walked me to the train station, paid her fare, and waited with me for my train to come. The train station stop was above ground, and as it was pulling out from the station, I watched her walking down the stairs back onto the sidewalk. I called my husband and explained what happened, and he met us at the ER. My daughter was perfectly fine, not a bump, bruise, or scratch on her. But the experience still troubles me several years later. The horror of the moment I fell will be emblazoned in my mind for the rest of my life. I know I fell flat into the street. I'm 6 feet 2 inches tall, and the crack was close to the curb, and it happened so fast I had no time to stop myself. I could feel her soft, tiny body underneath me. I know I saw that green car speeding towards us with bright headlights. And then I opened my eyes, a foot away from the curb, on my hands and knees. A white car was parked on the street, and my daughter was strapped to me safe and sound. I did not hit my head at any point during this entire experience. I'm not sure if this is creepy or nice, but in the weeks after the accident, 3 random people that I've never seen or met, 2 on the train, different locations and lines, and 1, while simply walking down the street in Lower Manhattan, stopped me to tell me in a serious voice that everything would be okay, then simply walked away. In my experience, after spending the first 21 years of my life in New York, these types of experiences rarely, if ever, happen, and certainly never happened to me before I fell. In January 2010, we moved back to Texas because I did not feel comfortable or safe anymore with my daughter in the city, and we have only been back for the occasional visit since. So what do you think? Was this a glitch, or am I slightly batty? I should mention that I'm certain this was not a dream, and I still have those ripped jeans today. 5. This all happened in May of 2016, so it's still a very vivid memory in my mind. I live in the Roman suburbs, somewhere around 20 kilometers west of the city center. The road I live on is private and particularly secluded. It's a pretty quiet place populated by a few relatively large houses, I'd say on average each house, including the garden, is about 4,000 square meters. As you can imagine, there can be quite some space between each house, which is an important detail for later. As usual, I invite some friends over for a smoke and a drink and a laugh. The night proceeds smoothly until about 2 a.m., when something rather peculiar happens. My kitchen has a very large sliding window, facing onto the darkest side of my garden. Without a bright moon, if you looked outside the window, you'd be pretty much staring into pitch black. We're all in there when all of a sudden we, or at least I, casually noticed an almost imperceptible, unintelligible distant babble. One you'd hear made by a crowd of around 15 to 20 people at a vibrant dinner party. I, of course, think nothing of it. In fact, I don't even think of it. I simply acknowledge it. It was, I think, a Saturday or a Friday night, so nothing unusual in a little party somewhere in the villas nearby. A few minutes, it may even have been seconds, pass by, and I'm surprised to notice that the hubbub's grown more distinct, clearer, as if the crowd generating it moved closer or was getting louder. I focus on the voices. I think this is when the tiniest alarm bell started ringing. I lose all interest in my friends and dedicate my undivided attention to the voices. When, after what must have been at least a minute, I notice they are getting louder, albeit infinitesimally slowly. I look around, and it doesn't look like anyone else noticed. Typical paranoid me, I think, brushing it off as a silly trick played by my mind. I make my way back into the conversation and lose track of the voices for a good few minutes. Then it really strikes me. The indistinct chatter now sounds like it's coming from the neighbor's house. But the neighbor is a good friend of mine, and I know he's with his family, visiting his wife's parents down in Sicily. What the fuck? I can't help but telling my friends, and am pleasantly surprised to know that I'm not the only one who's noticed. At this point, everyone's questioning the voices. After all, we heard nothing whatsoever until no more than 10 minutes ago, and now there's undoubtedly a semi-party going on in the neighbor's garden. We're all debating the nature of this curious phenomenon, when a friend I'm sitting next to squeezes my arm and tells me they're getting closer, louder. Silence among us. Now the voices are in the far end of my garden, down in the bottomless blackness. We flock to the window to get a peek but see nothing, as anything down that side of the garden would be swallowed in darkness. We stare in vain, and again the sounds move closer. As rattling as it seems, they now sound like they're directly out of my window. An invisible crowd casually chatting as though standing together by the side of a pool in a fancy house. It's unsettling to say the least, especially considering there's no one actually fucking there. Just sound waves of undetermined origin. They're so unexplainably close to us that we can now effortlessly make out what all these people are saying. But really it's just small talk, meaningless dinner party blabber. Then silence. The noise stops, and I don't mean like whoever was producing it slowed down and gradually came to a halt, no. It's more like a CD player being paused or taking your earphones out of your ears. From one moment to another, the voices brusquely stop and simply vanish in midair, leaving no traces behind, like they were never there. We're all spooked to the core at this point, and just spend the night talking about the incident, wondering if it could have been a collective auditory hallucination, a glitch in the matrix, an accidental rip in the space-time continuum. I often read that after an eerie or traumatizing experience, shared with friends or family, people tend not to talk about the experience a lot, perhaps to remove it from their minds as soon as possible. Well, my friends and I have been talking about it relentlessly, and have shared it with many other people too. But no one can give a really compelling explanation. And by the way, we had no speakers plugged in, no music playing, no TV on, no radio. Nothing. We all checked our phone immediately after this happened, and no random video or audio recording was playing that might have explained the sound. Edit. Someone asked this in the comment, and it's actually really important. The voices spoke Italian, and I think due to my bewilderment, I actually don't recall any specific name or even any specific conversation or discussion that was going on, nor some sort of weird accent. Also, I'm positive that it wasn't just one discussion going on, but several conversations happening at the same time, because the voices were overlapping. Another very important detail I forgot to mention. There was a background noise to the voices, like it was happening in a determined environment, and the background noise of that environment had traveled there with the voices. To understand what I mean by background noise, imagine being in the forest, you hear the birds, wind, the trees, maybe a stream, etc. A sort of background noise like that. But I wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly what context it belonged to. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories, Episode 10. Well, I swear these stories just get weirder and weirder the more I do them. Now, I think we've all heard odd sounds, perhaps the occasional word or name shouted out, and then we've realised there's no one who could possibly have said it. We've all had moments like that, but I've certainly never had someone have full conversations to the best of my knowledge. I'm intrigued. Although I do remember, as I was reading that story, it kind of popped into my head. I was watching a documentary about hauntings and things like that, and there's this pub, I can't remember where it's located, it may be England, where you do hear things like that, these random sounds and things, and they believed it may have had something to do with the composition of the actual bricks, the materials they built the pub in, that had kind of absorbed the sound over the years. That sounds a bit quasi-sciencey, I know, but, well, it's kind of a quasi-sciencey subject, really, isn't it? I wonder if it could be anything to do with that. I guess with most of these sort of things, we'll never really know what the explanation is. But it's still interesting to hear nonetheless. Okay, before I head off, I'd just like to thank everyone who allowed me to use their stories. It goes for both those I sourced from Reddit and the 2 folks that were kind enough to send their stories in to me. And I'm now going to go work on Friday's paranormal video. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.